All right. I can see folks are trickling in. And so I want to welcome everyone to our next in our webinar, Plantae webinar series. My name is Jason Padilla, and I am your technical host for today's webinar. This webinar series is brought to you by Plantae, the open online community for plant scientists powered by the American Society of Plant Biologists. I would like to give a special thank you to all of our ASP members who are in attendance today. Your membership dues help support making this webinar possible. For any of you who have not yet joined ASPB, you can join today and use the discount code %10 to receive a 10% discount on your registration. ASPB members get early access to these awesome webinars, and you can learn more about ASPB and the opportunities we provide at aspb.org. In addition, please be sure to check out our YouTube channel where you can find many other exciting talks. This webinar will be recorded and you can tune in on and watch it later as well. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items to make sure that you get the most out of attending today's webinar. If you're experiencing technical issues, please let us know about those using the chat box or by emailing me at jpadilla@aspb.org. If you have trouble connecting or need to leave early, know that the recording of this webinar will be made available again on our YouTube channel, so you can watch it later on. So be sure to follow the Plantae YouTube channel to receive notification when new content is posted, and we post new contents pretty regularly as this webinar happens frequently. All right, and now I'm gonna turn the floor over to a moderator who will facilitate today's session. So take it away, moderators.
Okay, so welcome to this edition of Plantae's webinar. As you all know, today's topic would be how to build a diverse and inclusive academic space. And we are privileged to have persons as speakers like Dr. Renita Garrison-Tall, who is currently the Vice Chancellor of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at University of California, Davis. Welcome, Dr. Garrison-Tall. And also, as a course speaker, we would also be having Dr. Golin Carl, who is currently the ASPB Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Early Career Representative. Welcome, Dr. Carl. So to give you an overview of the outline for today's webinar, firstly, I will be doing the speaker introductions, and followed by, I would also be doing the moderator introductions. But then Alice, who is also a co-moderator for today's webinar, would take on from there to handle the rest of the session, where she would proceed to the Q&A session, which is more like the main part of today's webinar. There, we would be talking about, we'll be engaging our speakers on various questions that are suggested by the attendees. So we would advise that once we get to the Q&A session, you send your questions, you drop your questions on the Q&A box and not on the chat box, so we can actually track those questions and have them sent to our speakers and they can answer them live. This is to ensure smooth flow of the discussion and ensure that we all have an exciting journey throughout today's webinar. So to close today's talk, Alice and Jason will be doing some concluding remarks. So once again, welcome to today's webinar. Yep, next slide. So to start off with the speaker's introduction, we have Dr. Renita Garrison-Tall, who is currently the Vice Chancellor of Diversity and Equity and Inclusion at the University of California, Davis. Dr. Renita Garrison-Tall is the Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of California, Davis. She previously served as the Associate Vice Provost for Strategic Initiatives at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Before joining University of California, Davis in 2019, Dr. Tall was Associate Vice Provost for Strategic Initiatives at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and Professor of the Practice in UMBC's College and Engineering and IT. Dr. Toll is the founding director and co-PI for the 12th Institution National Science Foundation University System of Maryland's PROMISE AGEP, and co-director and co-PI for the NSF-USM's Louis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation. She's an international speaker on global diversity in STEM. Dr. Toll has also led discussions around the world on topics such as inclusive engagement, engineering for all, cultivating inclusive cultivating inclusive excellence within science, engineering and technology, work-life balance, family, and prevention of domestic and workplace abuse. Her recognitions include 2015 O'Reilly Media Women in Data cover, 2015 Global Engineering Dean's Council /ABOS Diversity Award finalist, and the 2016 ABET Claire L. Felbinger Award for Diversity. Dr. Toll has more than 50 publications, has given more than 200 presentations on various STEM topics, and is a Tau Beta Pi eminent engineer. She also engages on the public on topics related to STEM and society, and was a speaker for Diversity STEAM and Comics, where A adds the arts to STEM at AwesomeCon in March 2018. She's a passionate advocate, global mentor, education policy strategist, and champion for equity in STEM. It's a privilege to have you for the webinar today, Dr. Renata Toll. Thank you. So, and the co-speaker for today's webinar would also be Dr. Geraldine Carl, who is currently the ASPB Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Early Career Representative. Geraldine Carl completed a PhD in December 2022 at the University of Florida. She worked on understanding and improving tomato flavor using integrated omics and breeding techniques. She received her master's degree from New Mexico State University, working on high oleic trait in a peanut breeding program. Dr. Carr has been the chair of the National Association of Plant Breeders George Washington Carver program since August 2021. She leads a group of graduate students, postdocs, and researchers from academia and industry to support students from diverse groups in their plant breeding careers. She has served as an early career representative of ASPB's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee since October 2022. As a first-generation graduate from a rural farm family in Punjab, India, Dr. Carol believes building a diverse and inclusive academic space is of utmost importance. We are definitely honored to have you on the call today, Dr. Carol. Thank you. So, and for myself, my name is Abdul Malik Abdul Kabir Omeiza, and I'm a graduate student at C+ Graduate School here in Germany. I am interested in molecular plant pathogen interactions and population genetics, and I received my bachelor's degree in plant biology from Nigeria. During that time, I had the privilege of engaging several student communities within and outside the university walls on the importance of cross-cultural understanding, diversity, inclusion, and equity in the pursuit of research and academic excellence. I have a strong passion for science writing and food security advocacy campaigns. And in my free time, I enjoy writing, discussing science, playing soccer, and enjoying nature views. Now you can reach me on Twitter at omeiza./planttalk. Thank you very much for having me today. So at this point, I leave the co-moderator, Alice, to take on from here. Alice, you have the stage.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for our speakers for being with us today. My name is Alice Pierce. I'm a PhD student at the Plant Biology Graduate Group at UC Davis. I study the relationship between intron-exon gene architecture and chromatin biology in the laboratory of Dr. Grade Monroe. I received my bachelor's of science also from UC Davis in biotechnology with an emphasis in plants, where I was part of Dr. Alan Rose's lab, researching the effects of intron-mediated enhancement on gene expression in plants. In addition to being a Plantae Fellow, I have an active role in making science more equitable and inclusive by participating in monthly K through 16th grade outreach to encourage students to remain scientifically curious. In addition, we'd like to highlight our third moderator, who unfortunately cannot be with us today, but we want to highlight all the efforts that she put into this. Her name is Eva Maria Gomez Alvarez. She's a PhD student from Scuola Superiore from Sant'Anna Pizza in Italy. She is a PhD student in agrobiodiversity. She's Spanish, 26-year-old feminist woman. She studies cereal genetics and microbiome, and during her free time, she plays the flute, runs, and reads feminist books. With that, thank you so much for listening to our introductions. And again, we welcome you. Right now, we would like to start our Q&A session. As a reminder to our attendees, please type your questions in the Q&A box so that we can keep track of all those questions and facilitate our discussion and the flow of our webinar. To start off, we Plantae Fellows have prepared some questions for our speakers. And our first question is that we would like to know a little bit more about our speakers and their story, and when they grew to become someone who advocates and seeks to ensure diverse and inclusive academic spaces. Would any of our speakers like to volunteer to tackle this question?
I'm happy to start, but Dr. Carr, did you want to start because you're from the Plantae community? I'm happy to let you go first.
Sure, thank you so much. First of all, I want to welcome you all to the webinar and extend my deepest gratitude to the Plantae Fellows for the invitation. I'm fresh out of grad school, and it's a great opportunity to discuss my experiences on such a great topic. They mostly covered my introduction. To add on, I grew up on a farm family in a small village in India, and my experience of working with diverse teams at 2 schools in the US for both my master's and PhD has definitely played a significant role in shaping my thoughts and strategies. We were the students coming from diverse groups based on gender, ethnic, and racial backgrounds, which helped me understand the differences in everyone's behavior, and also learned that a lack of exposure could result in losing a potential interest in every field of science. In my teaching strategies, I tried to expose students to plant science, and also, as Alice mentioned, she participates in K-16 program. I volunteered to teach in high schools programs to teach the basics of DNA. We have what we call UFDNA Day, at least at the University of Florida, to celebrate the information of DNA, and also to keep the kids interested in science studies. Additionally, I believe there is no age limit to learn. So I also participated in Seed School Day, where we demonstrate various breeding techniques to local growers to how they can save seeds around the community. So these experiences certainly helped me to take on roles which were mentioned before, be it at ASPB as an early career representative, or at National Association of Plant Breeders, where I lead a group to help the plant breeding students to support their career. Yeah, that was what I wanted to add. And if you have like any questions which you want me to emphasize on, I'll be happy to answer.
Well,
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was nice to learn a little bit more about you, and also congratulations, Dr. Carr, on recently finishing your doctorate, and happy to be on the panel with you. I also want to thank Abdul Kabir and Alice Pierce for their moderation, and certainly Jason Padilla for all the work in the background. So my journey began pretty much on the East Coast of the United States. I am from Plainfield, New Jersey. I was born in Philadelphia. And I think my earliest thought probably came from my father, because I was talking about doing something in the medical field. And I told my father that I thought I wanted to be a nurse. And he said, well, you know, girls can be doctors too. If you want to be a nurse, that's fine. But if you want to be a doctor, you can be a doctor too. And so I think that was my first sort of foray into this idea of gendered roles and how we can think about certain kinds of things based on what we were seeing and how we were identifying with various careers. But then it was not only that, it was later learning more about engineering. My background is now in engineering, but that is because my father had recommended that I consider engineering in terms of moving my math and science forward. My father actually taught me calculus at our kitchen table. And I have very fond memories. He has since passed on, but very fond memories of learning how to integrate from him, and he was just trying to make it a lot of fun for me. I went to historically Black college and university in the US, Howard University, for my undergrad. But my interest in sort of DEI and diversity also started in a program that I was in 7th and 8th grade, where I developed an interest in accessibility. So I was really interested in laryngectomies, people who had cancer of the larynx, and technology, and trying to see why technology had not really moved forward to capture, for example, different kinds of voices, or the voices of people who had various kinds of disabilities, whether it was from brain infarction, from other kinds of speech communication. But that was one of the things that I was looking to do. So I studied some of the automatic sort of artificial larynxes, as they called them at the time, where you could adjust the frequencies to make one a so-called male voice and another one a so-called female voice. But later, when I was in graduate school, I did sort of try to connect the two, electrical engineering and speech processing, in order to start to look at accessibility in tech. And so I began to look at deaf speech and deaf speakers, and did a little bit of the early work in speech recognition systems and some of the systems that were the very, very early precursors to what we know now as Siri and Alexa, and when we're speaking to Google and so forth, because I used to be interested in making sure that there weren't just one set of voices that could be recognized by those systems, but that a multitude of voices could be recognized. Those are my beginnings.
Thank you so much for sharing, both of you, your experiences. It's awesome. I think this is a great segue for one of our audience questions, which is, how can we help develop inclusive and accessible apps and softwares, including bioinformatics software? Thinking about how you have all this background in technology, how do we play a role on building those inclusive and accessible softwares? Yeah.
So if you don't mind me starting, and then I can share the time with Dr. Kaur on this. I'll share what I went through trying to get some of this work done early on, and working with the National Technical Institute of the Deaf and other groups. One of the first things we had to do was to make sure that we were including a lot of voices, a lot of people in our experiments, right? So as scientists, we always know that we have to have a lot of background, a lot of subjects. We have to have a lot of data to deal with. And a lot of times in this work, there's not a lot of data, because people have not yet gone out to do the testing in the field, and they haven't necessarily collected enough samples, whether it's samples of people using certain kinds of software, doing human-computer interaction kinds of testing. As there is data collected, and data has to be collected from a variety of different people, even within accessibility community. So it can't just be one group from one part of the country or one country, because there are different kinds of behaviors, there are different kinds of ways of doing things in a variety of communities, especially when there are intersections. So one of the things we talk about often in DEI is intersectionality. So there might be certain things that work for certain communities of women with various disabilities, of men with various disabilities, of people who speak different languages and different disabilities. But getting the data first is really crucial to making a case, because we need to have the data so that there can then be funding that's put forward to say that there's a demand for this kind of technology. Because without that, that was one of the biggest hurdles that I used to deal with, is that people would say, well, there's not a demand, there's not enough people to really make us change our systems. And I would say, well, even if there's just a small amount, if there's still a consumer base, and we still have to make sure that they're included as well. So all of that advocacy, as well as getting the data, is really important.
Yeah, I think I would echo everything that Dr. Tall said. And I'll also add on, not like to the research side, but most of the time, we as an individual think, how can I contribute to this topic? Or like students and be it professionals at different career stages. I like to believe it starts with very simple steps to communicate, to build and maintain trust. So if you are in a lab, you can play your role, even if you're a student, to this topic, by just setting up expectations and making sure everyone is feeling safe and included in that work environment. Starting to know everyone in your workplace and addressing their individual needs, that's where you can start from. And that's where I started being a grad student earlier.
Thank you so much, both. I think this next question might be for Dr. Carr. We have a question from the audience that says, what are some challenges for developing technologies for teaching plant molecular biology to students across developing economies, such as India? And they bring a specific example how this might be, how these technologies might be developed for students with visual impairment.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think I can relate to that segment of, how it's developed in India, because I did my undergrad there. So when we talk about these emerging technologies there, I did not have like a teaching experience there, but I can talk about, I'm tailoring in my teaching experiences from the US on how we can build resources back in India. So it's going to be with those diverse environments, the challenges that where I revolved my teaching strategies was first to communicate everyone and to make everyone feel included so that they can trust me with their needs. I think with the teaching module where we try to accommodate everyone with specific needs. So we also try to disclose that in the teaching perspectives. However, there are challenges with diverse backgrounds. And the most crucial thing that I learned, if there is less exposure to any student at certain stage, it will really affect how the overall performance is. So it's crucial, your contribution as a teaching assistant. I really tried to include everyone wherever needed, and also to focus on any specific needs that I could accommodate. And the specific, talking about the specific challenges, I think it also comes to resources at some point, and some of the psychological barriers as well, I would say, on what I experienced based in two of the grad school experiences in the US and in India in my undergraduate. I hope I answered that.
Yeah, I'd like just to circle back a little bit to maybe what are some challenges, or what can we do to facilitate teaching these important plant concepts with people with disabilities and people with visual impairment?
Yeah, I think with visual impairment. Probably Dr. Tull can add on to the specifics, on the technical side. But I would say, with the overcoming the psychological barriers, in that common space is the most important hurdle I think that we have to overcome in these teaching spaces. Dr. Tull, do you want to add something on that in terms of technicality?
So I do know that there are some schools that will have an ergonomics department or a technical and accessibility department, and they specifically look at different kinds of technology and software and so forth that are available and coming out. Many times they're going to trade shows and things like that to see what could best accommodate people who have various kinds of accessibility needs. And so I would say making sure that the lab or anyone who has the need is looking into those kinds of resources on campus. Sometimes those resources go underutilized because they don't necessarily go out to every single lab. What they do, they may go out to schools and colleges or deans meetings and so forth. And if that information doesn't get filtered down, then there may not be knowledge that those kinds of resources exist. But I do know that, for example, we have at UC Davis, we do have a person who is dedicated to accessibility and technology. And so he's always looking at different kinds of things, whether they're screen readers or other kinds of technologies that are going to be useful. He takes recommendations and suggestions and then goes to investigate that. There is funding that's then put toward whatever things need to be taken care of. And so I would just say investigate the resources that are there on campus. And if not on campus, sometimes there are national companies that may have opportunities to test out different kinds of software or algorithms or beta test some of their work. And that's an opportunity to see what also might work for a person.
Thank you so much to both of you. Our next question from the audience is, what modifications can be made in the academic and laboratory environments to recruit and maintain students who have children?
I'll jump in just with a little bit. So I think that one has to pay attention, I'll say specifically for faculty who are the PIs of the lab. Of course, making sure that an environment is a safe environment to begin with. That has to be the case for both adults and children, making sure that it's a safe environment. There are some people who have various labs that will say you can bring your children with you, and they will have different areas that are set up for children, and they specifically create that as an area. There are, in some cases, graduate studies departments or graduate studies buildings that have specific play areas or areas for children. As an example, at UC Davis, there's a new graduate studies building, and that graduate studies building does have a conference room for students who have children where they can do their work, but then it has a play area for students who can be there. There are places where students and whomever can nurse, for example, if they need to do that. But I think a general environment, creating an environment for people with children is important, and letting people know what that environment is. When I worked in graduate studies at my previous university, one of the things that we used to do for different kinds of programming, not necessarily in the lab, but for programming for courses and things like that, is we used to tell people that, of course, their children were welcome, and we made it a welcoming environment such that people got a chance to develop community so that the children were passed around. I mean, I've held people's babies when they were giving talks. As an example, we, sort of became the, extended family members. In some cases, watching children sort of grow up from time to time, making sure their needs were met, helping to, take care of someone if someone needs to take a break or something like that. So developing, I think, communities that are conducive to families and family life. The PI has to really sort of set that goal. If that PI is not necessarily amenable, then this is where students, postdocs, lab managers, and so forth can say, this is something that we'd like to have as a culture of the lab. Are there certain things that we can do, or how can we facilitate something that's going to be welcoming to families, and then, you know, sort of co-create what that environment can be.
Yeah, I think I would like to add on that, that you have to advocate, you know, there can be some instances, it's great if you have all those resources on campus, what Dr. Tell mentioned, right? But if not, you as a community has to speak up and advocate for some of those as well. And I would also like to add on the living options as well. You know, if you're a grad student with kids, so as an organization, if you have affordable like living options on campus where you know you can survive as a community and grow up, and you have your lab mates around. So at UF, we have like graduate living houses where these are given to the families, and which is a great resource to use being a grad student and know you can raise your kids, and also being a grad student and still get affordable living options as well.
Thank you so much for your answers. Our next question is, how can people who are not a part of historically excluded groups better support access to the sciences for everyone?
I can start for this one. That's
Yes,
a great
sure.
question. Yeah, I feel while working towards this topic, I felt sometimes we feel this is only the responsibility who belong to, you know, these groups. It is not. Even if you don't have like an experience or you don't belong to these groups, I think you can still contribute and you can still iterate the broader message. I know a few people who are not from the similar groups and still are making continuous efforts in terms of the diversity at ASPB and other organizations. And I think it also helps you grow well as an individual when you are helping with these, helping the groups that are actually experiencing some sort of difficulties or challenges, I would say. So the specific options start taking part in it. When it comes to diversity, it's not for specific groups, it's for everyone. If you are not suffering, it's just like, how can you help? How can you understand and help in future? So I like to take it like that.
That's a great place to continue from. So I'll just sort of do the ... and continue on from there. I think that a key piece of this is recognizing, first of all, the humanity, you know, in everyone. And another thing that I'm sort of working on right now as a framework is this concept of deservedness, right? That everyone deserves to have not only a quality education, but the opportunity to create and to make scientific contributions for those who are going into science. So specifically, I would say for those, if you're thinking about your lab environment, your colleagues, your peers, your mentees, if you're a graduate student teaching undergraduate students, if you're a future professor, it's first of all recognizing that everyone has talents and that everyone has attributes that are going to contribute to the way that they can add to the science. They got into science to begin with because they were curious, because they had a level of aptitude. And so honoring that, first of all, I think a lot of times, sometimes when people start out, there may be questions about why certain people may be in the classroom or in the lab. So that has to be erased right away. Everyone who's there deserves to be there. Everyone who's there has something to contribute. It may be in different ways. Knowledge comes in a lot of different forms. There's indigenous knowledge, for example, in addition to, let's say, traditional book knowledge or Western knowledge and the way that people learn. There are things that should be considered to be assets and not deficits. For example, speaking various languages, having various kinds of cultural experiences and lived experiences, all of those things add to the ways that we think, the ways that we are thinking about our methodologies, how we may come to conclusions, and that has to be honored. And so another thing too, I think for people who may not be, I mean, everyone is not from every single group. There are a lot of intersectionalities, but all of us are, there are groups that we do not belong to. All right, so we have to learn about those groups and not be ashamed about what we don't know, and not be defensive about what we don't know, right? There are things that even in my role every day, I'm still learning. I am still learning about a variety of different groups within groups, how things are done within groups, and not assuming that I know everything. And I'll give an example. For example, yes, I am an African American born in the US. I had enslaved ancestors who came through in Virginia, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I understand all the experiences that people have had from other parts of the African diaspora. I had a chance to go to South Africa recently and have learned more. I've been to the Caribbean recently. A lot of my work in the Latinx community was in Puerto Rico and in South America, working in Ecuador, working in Costa Rica, and Peru and so forth. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I understood all the things from the lived experiences of farm workers in California, who had ancestors who were Mexican, who were here before people came and colonized the land. So there are a lot of different kinds of things. We have federally recognized tribes, for example. We have unrecognized tribes. There are reasons why tribes are not federally recognized because of missions. So we have to learn history, not be afraid of it, not be ashamed of it, not be so. I used to wear sunglasses a lot, and they kind of had a rosy color, but we can't have rose-colored glasses when we want things to be good. And just because we want things to be good and right doesn't necessarily mean that they are. And we have to be okay with that. We have to be okay with the discomfort, recognize that not everything is as good as we may want it to be, but then be committed to saying, okay, let me find out what I can do. Let me do some background reading. Let me learn more. I will recommend a really good book. I think that will be apropos for this audience. And it's by a plant scientist named Dr. Veranda Montgomery. Dr. Montgomery wrote a fabulous book called Lessons from Plants. And her book talks about how you can learn about diversity, equity, and inclusion, mentoring, and those kinds of things, whether it's peer mentoring or hierarchical mentoring, but learning based on what you know from plants, how things take root, how things need nurturing to grow, and so forth. So I highly recommend that as one of the books that's in the plant biology field.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your answer. So we have another audience question here. How can we attract people of underrepresented groups to fields that we consider the people usually don't go into those fields? For example, how can we attract undergraduates to not as diverse fields?
Okay. Do you mind if we switch and I start this time, Dr. Carr, and you go ahead? So, so as a person who was, I'll say, sort of recruited, if you will, into engineering, having programs certainly, I think, Alice, you talked about in your introduction how you work with K-16 or K-12 programs from those students who are very young in kindergarten, going through primary school and secondary school, and or what we might say is middle school, junior high school, and high school, and encouraging them to be scientists, and letting them know that it's okay to be a scientist. And even if they're not seeing people who look like them or from their background who are scientists, to let them know that they are smart and they are brilliant. There are so many students and young children, young adults, teenagers who are really interested in science and who are really good at math, and it may be manifesting in different ways. There are so many people who are interested in science, who are interested in plants, and again, who have different ways of knowing. I spent a little bit of time with some Native American tribes in the northern part of the US and learned from some of the elders there about how they identified with the land, how the land is sacred, and how they can identify, many of the children can identify all kinds of plants and times of year and how things change and so forth. Some of that may not necessarily come through within some of the standardized tests, but it doesn't mean that there's a lack of brilliance there or a lack of interest and curiosity. And I think affirming those different ways of knowing, affirming different kinds of knowledge, affirming people's curiosity when they're looking at something and they're saying, oh, I wonder how this works, or I'm interested in growing a garden, and not saying, oh, well, you're not from a group who usually does that, but just really taking it on. There's a person named Ron Finley who has a master class, and the master class, he calls himself, he's from Oakland, California, he calls himself the gangster gardener. And he uses that term because he really wants people to start to learn how to grow their own food, to understand plants and soil, and to really dig deep and not think that just because they haven't necessarily seen themselves in certain kinds of backgrounds that they can't be there. And I think the more people who sort of come forward and say, yes, we need you there, we want you there, and I'm going to show you some new things, and it's going to be exciting, and you probably already know some of this, and you can teach me some things too, that reciprocity also makes a difference. So make it exciting, invite people in, and let them know that they are part of sort of this brilliant community of scientists.
Yeah, to add on that, what helped me to be in a science role, I would say I had a role model. Be someone's role model. The kids are really looking towards you, and if they have a role model, that's what I learned being a teaching assistant at my grad school, like really focusing on someone and presenting what they can achieve, and just participate in all those, like sometimes you get notifications for the school, the science fair, or the judging opportunities. Just make that kind of connection so that you can get attached to these kids, and they can take the diverse fields that you're specifying. And at a bigger level, or like at an organization level like ASPB, there can be like certain awards, like at the University of Florida. I know we have some fellowships and all, like to specify to certain fields of plant science, or like animal science and all that. So that can be at a bigger level, but like as an individual, you can be someone's role model and present them the various ways how they can be a successful career in plant sciences or the other diverse fields.
Thank you so much. Just following up on this, I know you mentioned fellowships, but what are some other institutional approaches that are being taken to attract more diverse applicants for undergrad, graduate school, or even for jobs?
So one thing that a lot of schools and colleges are starting to do, and a lot of this is with the help of professional organizations and government organizations in the US, in particular, we have, for example, the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, or the USDA for Department of Agriculture as an example. And many of these government organizations have grants, or they have research where they are working with universities, and those universities then have opportunities to develop programs, and those programs then partner with some of the primary schools and secondary schools, elementary schools or junior high schools. And that's where a lot of people may get some of their, I think, early connections to the work, participation in science fairs. For example, if you have a chance to be a judge at a science fair, or as Dr. Carr talked about, being a role model, getting involved in those kinds of things, and those kinds of grant-funded activities, if those activities are successful, what it often leads to is an opportunity for institutionalized or core funding that will come after the grant ends. So if, for example, let's say that there's a $5 million grant, and that grant is to go into the schools and support a science fair, and they see that students are not only winning the science fair, but then they're coming on campus, and later on you see a trajectory of those students who are applying to the university. The university is more apt, especially if there's data and there shows that there's satisfaction, the university is more apt to then invest a couple of $1 million later in that program. It might be a staff person, a permanent staff person, who then is in charge of helping to bring new students in. It may be in some scholarships or fellowships that are now permanently part of a school or college or department that will be for students who participated in some of those programs. And so that's how things slowly get institutionalized when there's success. Also going to where students are. So again, I was saying I went to Howard University, which is an historically Black university in Washington, D.C. And we had people from various schools who would come to our school to say, we want you to be in our graduate programs, or we have, some exciting lab opportunities for you. And coming to places and telling people that they are wanted is very important as well. There's some social science that talks about invitation to engage, and the invitation to people saying that we want you to be involved, as opposed to just, as I say, like putting a poster on the wall and expecting them to look at it and then to say on their own, okay, well, maybe they want me, I'm not sure, should I apply? Those kinds of things do happen to work. So I'll stop there and let Dr. Carr go.
Yeah, I think just to echo all the institutionalized things that Dr. Tall mentioned, I just want to mention that you also have to identify to create an opportunity. Sometimes these programs are not in place. So that's what we are doing with plant breeding specifically. We identified that not like many undergraduate students who are coming we wanted to focus on the undergraduate institutions. So we started looking out for not like big schools, but the schools who even don't have like a separate plant breeding department. If they have a biology department, I'll reach out to identify a couple of mentors and make those personal connections. So I have made those personal connections over the last year, and now I just give them, if we have an announcement or something, I know because of that personal connection. So we identified an opportunity and made a connection there. And I think don't be afraid of leading the change. If you see an opportunity and you see there are not many applicants or many students in your area of research, you should talk about it and create opportunities through ASPB. They are always interested, as Dr. Tall mentioned. It can, if they feel there is a success in this program, the students are applying to the jobs or to the grad schools later, and you have a healthy and consistent relationship with that kind of program. So that helps you build and institutionalize and secure a consistent funding. So it's a really important point that Dr. Tall mentioned here, and I'll echo that with the utmost importance here.
Thank you so much. So just a heads up, we're reaching the last 12-ish minutes of our webinar, so I'll be asking a last call for questions. I think we have time for about 2 more questions. So our next audience question here is, what are some of the difficulties that international students face, and what steps can be taken to resolve them?
I can start on that. Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm really sympathetic on that topic, because I was an international student from India to the US, and I have done my master's and PhD both in a new culture and diverse environments around here. There were many challenges. Emotional, you're away from your family, and then COVID happened as well. For some years, you could not see your family, along with the professional challenges and progresses that you have going on. I think one suggestion that I would like to give is to engage in the community, to make your connections, and don't feel you are the only one. So you have, like, there are other international students, even other office mates or students who doesn't share the same background but share the story. They know they might be from a different state in the US and they're also staying away from home. Even if they are domestic students, I think they can share the feelings. So that's how I coped with it. I talked about it. I did not feel shy to say, hey, I'm homesick and I am having these difficulties because I'm away from my family. So that was one. And I think when you make it to grad school, you are capable. So identify that and accept that. So that's like one thing that I feel most of the international students can use, like a little more encouragement, that you are good and you got into grad school, and you need to accept that fact and you need to keep building on that.
Excellent. So building on that, if I may build from where you left off, I would like to share sort of two contexts. One of them is a UC Davis context, and one of them is a context that I had maybe a couple of years ago. So my Office of DEI partners very strongly with Global Affairs. Our Global Affairs unit is certainly a first stop for support for any international students. And sometimes I would say international students may focus they think all the resources are within their department. I would say outside of your department, within the university, there are also often resources. So please check to see if those resources are available. It might be opportunities for just learning where or how to live. There might be seminars, there might be connection groups with people who may be from your home country and so forth. Now, related to I will say cultural context, for example, in the United States, one of the things that we did with Global Affairs, especially when we had the death of George Floyd and a lot of social unrest that was happening in the United States, I gave a lot of, I had some talks with the global group that our Global Affairs Vice Provost put together, just to share and to offer an opportunity for people to ask questions. So there are no wrong questions, there are no stupid questions, there are no questions where anyone is going to be judged. So to have a judgment-free zone where people could ask questions, because certainly there are a lot of differences in cultural contexts. I've had an opportunity to teach at the College of Engineering Pune in India, and also to be in some groups in Taiwan, and to do some things in Beijing. And so working with students at universities, different universities in different contexts, I recognize that there are differences in context. And in the same way that I had to learn different things when I was going to other countries, when people come to the US, there also has to be a level of learning. But I would also offer, from a DEI standpoint, when I was at UMBC in Maryland, there was a student who was from India, for example, who asked, could he come to a program that we had that was for historically, basically you would say historically marginalized students. And he said because he felt lonely and he felt alone, and one of his best friends happened to be African-American who was in the lab, and he wanted to come with him because he felt the student was having a good experience. And so he did, and I said, well, yes, of course, you could do that. What we ended up doing that was really interesting and exciting is, as we opened it up to people from different countries, there was a lot of sharing that went on in those contexts. We had people from historically marginalized backgrounds, particularly Native American students in the US, Native American students, African American students, in some cases, Asian Pacific Islander students, Latinx students, who were suddenly for the first time learning Mandarin, because there were students who said, I want to share culture with you. There were people who were learning different ways to be in community. We were learning, and there's always connection across food and cuisine, right? Learning different foods and how to eat them and how to appreciate them and how to appreciate different family structures and so forth. And all of those things were so important. The way it worked later in some cases, when there were issues where, for example, this goes back to an earlier question, let's say there were then no more students in that next round who were from historically marginalized backgrounds, it was the international students who were doing the recruitment. It was the international students who were going into the schools to say, we need to recruit and we need to make sure that people are retained. And then they started bringing students into some of those retention programs and some of those community building programs and became the leaders. And so it just goes to show that building community really works, recognizing, again, the humanity that we all share and that we all bring something to the table really helps to make a difference.
Thank you so much. Awesome. So in these last few minutes, we have one last question for our speakers. It's what institutionally, what key policies do you suggest need to be in place to make building diverse and inclusive academic spaces? And what are the roles of specific individuals in making this a reality?
I think I can add on like how as an individual you can contribute, and Dr. Tull can provide perspectives because she's working on a bigger level there for that objective. I think as a person, you need to understand we are not talking about like a perfect system here. We are talking about making significant progress, which comes with time. So it's not going to be, one change and everything is going to be all perfect. So we need to accept that statement, and we need to start working towards the progress. Recently, like in 2020, there was like the first all women-led team who got the Nobel Prize, and that came pretty recently. So I would say it's safe to say we made significant improvement, but we still have a long road. How you can contribute as an individual is, first, I think we all need to be leaders. So we all need to start thinking how we can contribute. It's not you cannot contribute, you can. So how you can contribute should be the question you should be asking, and not like, is it important if the student can contribute or not? So start from your own lab, start bringing out what you think can make a better work environment in your own lab. Start talking to your advisor, and in the department, there will be multiple opportunities to identify the programs you can lead. So start there, even if you are not someone who is relatable to some specific groups. But as Dr. Tull mentioned, we all have our intersectionalities, and we need to understand we can belong to multiple groups and not understand what's going on with the other groups. But we still need to identify the opportunities. That's what helped me to understand all these facts and make some changes. I think that's really important for you to start doing something. I would leave with that too, Dr.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. I would say in addition to starting to do something, so in that starting to do something, I would say, please don't be shy about joining groups and being active. Being active in both your discipline-specific group like this one, but also if there's an affinity group that you'd like to be active in, to be active there as well. I always advocate for that, to be active in more than one space. Also find communities that you can connect with, and then share information that needs to be put into practice, maybe as an extension of policy with different groups on campus when there are opportunities to do so. And let me give a really quick example that's very important. For example, in the disability community, one of the things that we learned, as I was saying, I worked in accessibility, and we had always been taught from the ADA that you should use language that was person first. So student with disability, scientist with disability. Well, in some of the later years and later generation, we found that there were students who were on our campus who said that they wanted to have identity first language. They wanted to be known as autistic students or disabled students, but it wasn't in every group. So students who were part of our Down syndrome, Fragile X group of inclusive college students, they wanted to have person first, where they were students with disabilities, but those students who were neurodiverse and were autistic wanted identity first. And so we would not have known that unless we were having active conversations with students. And if students hadn't come to say, hey, we need to have some changes, or we need to have some dialogue and discussion because things are changing and may not necessarily be the way that you think they are. So the student voice is very important. Coming together in communities and having communities come together to share is important, so we know what the needs are. And I'll end it there, because again, there's actually so much more, but I think we're out of time. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you today.
Thank you so much for your for being here, for your answers and all your insights. Yeah, thank you so much to everyone. Thank you to our speakers for being here. Thank you for our audience for attending. And any question that we were not able to answer will be made available after the webinar along with the recording. And with that, I will pass it along to Jason. I think you might be muted, Jason.
Yeah, thank you again, everyone, for attending this webinar and such an insightful session. Thank you to our speakers and moderator, and all of you are in attendance. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and hope to see you at the next webinar. Again, we'll post all of the webinar recording on the Plantae site, and it will be made available in a few days. So hope see you all very soon.